politicians are the same. We will choose inflation over austerity. The dollar is in trouble, and there's really no way out of nearly 200 trillion in debt. When you've offshored all your manufacturing, you can't produce your way out of it. You will inflate or default. And I think people realize that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And if they don't go back to some sort of a tether like gold, then it will be just another system. A CBDC that is not backed by something as another fiat currency. And if you want to make it work, you need to go back and have some sort of a tether to a system that puts restraint on politicians' ability to print endlessly.
On today's episode of What the Finance podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Andy Schectman. He's president of Miles Precious Metals Investments. So, Andy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast there.
Good to be back. Good to see you again, Anthony. It's been, I don't know, almost 6 months. So lots happened, but glad to be invited back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel like it's felt more than 6 months. It's probably felt like years with all the stuff that's been happening. Unfortunately, it seems like every week just new things are occurring. And I guess last time we talked about central banks buying gold for the past few years, and I'd really recommend sort of listeners watch that again, and I'll put that in the description below. Maybe can you give us a quick explanation of what you've seen in the past 6 months, or what are the key areas that you've been watching that you've thought either support that hypothesis or have changed what you're thinking?
Well, I mean, you can certainly look at, if we're talking, let's ignore what's happened inside the States with the banks and the regional and the commercial banks and all that stuff, and just talk about gold and silver, excuse me, in the way that we've seen deliveries off of COMEX and the LBMA, the way that we've seen the central banks continue to purchase. So far this year, we've seen over 13,000 silver contracts stand for delivery. That's over 65 million ounces of silver. And we've seen, I don't know, over 250 tons of gold been delivered since January 1st. And when these deliveries happen off of the COMEX exchange, they're being delivered to the most sophisticated investors on the planet, because taking delivery off of COMEX is not an easy thing to do. It would be much easier to write me a check for $20 million and get gold and silver bars and coins than it would be to take delivery of contracts off of COMEX in 100-ounce gold bars or 1,000-ounce silver bars. And when you do take them off of the exchange, you have now lost any and all industrial liquidity, where if Elon Musk says, I'll pay a big premium for every 1,000-ounce bar in a COMEX vault that anyone wants to sell, bang, you've lost that. You have to reintroduce it, get it reassayed, send it in, big costs. That ain't ever happening. When these items are being delivered off of COMEX, it is a one-way ticket. Last week, when I was recovering from a surgery I had, I was doing a little research, and in looking at it last week, the 7 trading days previous, 55 tons of gold had been delivered over those 7 previous trading days off of COMEX. This is massive amounts of gold and silver being drained, irrespective of the price, by the most well-funded, well-informed, sophisticated investors on the planet. BlackRock buys $175 million worth of PSLV. And, so you're seeing big players. But what about central banks? As you mentioned, in the first 3 months of the year, the central banks bought almost 230 tons of gold. That's the most ever seen in a first quarter, ever, according to the World Gold Council. And that follows up what we already saw was the biggest record year in central bank gold purchases of 1,136 tons. You put that time frame together, it is the most gold ever accumulated by the central banks in history over an 18-month period. You have China, who just extended their silver purchases into the 7th straight month. You have the Central Bank of India, who for the last several years has been massively accumulating gold. Their gold holdings are up 40% over the last 5 years. You have Singapore, who bought their gold holdings are up 35% in the last 3 months. They're the biggest purchaser of gold this year, up 35% in 3 months. The Central Bank of Iraq purchases 2.5 tons of gold here just a couple of weeks ago. And they're now up to 132 tons of gold. And this goes on and on and on. And, you are are over in Europe. And so when we look at what the European banks are talking about, how about this? New information on the websites of the Bank of Italy, the Dutch National Bank, and others, where the Bank of Italy now says on its website that gold is an excellent hedge against adversity. And unlike foreign currencies, gold cannot depreciate or be devalued. The Dutch National Bank says that gold is the perfect piggy bank. And if the system collapses, the gold stock can serve as a basis to build it up again. And another thing that I find interesting is that several of the European central banks, in particular Netherlands, Austria, France, Germany, Hungary, Poland, all of them repatriated their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed over the last several years. Give it back to us. At the same time, we see upgrading of gold reserves to current wholesale LBMA industry standards. And in particular, France, Sweden, and Germany have sent all of their bars in for refining that were not pure gold. A lot of these central banks would have brought in the gold coins that they used to sell, 100 years ago, like the French franc or the Swiss 20 franc or the German 20 mark. They would melt them down and make them into bars that are part of their official gold holdings, but they don't meet LBMA industry standards of being pure 24 karat gold. So these countries have refined their gold into 24 karat LBMA good delivery 400-ounce bar standards. So whether you're talking about draining of the exchanges, which isn't just the COMEX, the LBMA is seeing record drawdowns in all of their hard metals, not just gold and silver. Zinc down 95% last year, aluminum down 75%, silver the lowest level in the 140-year history of the LBMA, and gold being drawn down also. The biggest one-day delivery off of the Shanghai Gold Exchange in silver in the history of the exchange 2 weeks ago. This is a phenomenon where the big sophisticated money is using the Western suppression of paper price to drain the exchanges. At the same time, the central banks have been on a buying spree. They are upgrading the standards of the bars that don't meet good delivery standards. They are putting on their website different verbiage in the way that they view precious metals. You have the head of the IMF who came out last week, Kristalina Georgieva, says that central bank digital currencies need to be pegged to something in order for them not to be speculative. They wrote a report 3 months ago titled Gold, an International Reserve, a barbarous relic no more, ? What did the BIS do in 2019? They reclassified gold as what? The world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. So you put all this together. The BIS and the IMF are talking about gold as a reserve and it being central. I believe when they say pegged to a system, they're talking gold, pegging to a new currency, a CBDC, to give it legitimacy. And all of the central banks around the world not only are on a massive buying spree or an upgrading spree, but they're also on a repatriation spree. The big money, which is using the Western suppression of the paper price to the point where 2 weeks ago, Friday or Thursday, when the price of silver got clobbered, some idiot dumped 26 million ounces of silver, or 5,178 contracts, each being 5,000 ounces at a time of silver, onto COMEX over a span of 15 minutes at the open. Bang! Dump it. Why would anyone do that other than to get the worst possible settlement? That trader should be fired and shot, and probably not in that order. It was done as a drive-by shooting to smash the price with all paper, no physical, in order to push the price down to create a perception of reality. So what I'm getting at is that the biggest money in the world, and mind you, there is not one trader in the world who would do that, trying to maximize that trade. They would bleed it out over days or weeks, not all at once at the opening. You're guaranteeing it fell by $1 plus, guaranteeing the worst settlement, done for effect. And what is happening is that the biggest money in the world is using these types of shenanigans to drain the exchanges, to take possession of metal away from the central banks, away from the Bank of England and the New York Fed, taking full possession of it, putting it into a fashion that meets good delivery standards. And now you hear the head of the IMF say we need to have the CBDCs pegged, and the BIS, the most powerful bank in the world, reclassified the gold as the only other tier 1. You put this all together, And you see a narrative that is unfolding, one that is of the most sophisticated players in the world have changed the way that they look at gold. And I believe it will be the backing of a new system, whether it be the new BRICS currency that Jim Rickards has publicly said will be announced August 22nd at the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. Well, I've been saying this for 3 years. Now you got Jim Rickards saying it's coming and as soon as August 22nd. And so there is a change afoot. And I do believe any CBDC that is issued, in order for it to have legitimacy, will have to be pegged to something. And what better thing to peg it to than what the most sophisticated bank in the world calls the only other tier one reserve asset in the world, gold. That's my thesis. That's what I see happening. And you can see this de-dollarization is only gaining momentum.
Yeah, a lot covered there. So I guess why do you see this happening? I know we've mentioned a few things previously about, I guess, de-dollarization. There's a concern that your money can be confiscated, obviously depreciation. Are those really the key aspects that the key factors that you're seeing will influence this?
No, I think it's a lack of trust. I think the world realizes that politicians since the beginning of time have always chosen inflation over austerity. And that's no different now. They will never be able to stop inflating the US dollar. On top of 32 trillion in debt, we have almost 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government military pensions, and many other off-balance sheet obligations that will never be paid back. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. We have screwed the unique privilege of being the world reserve currency. We have messed up that privilege. And I think the world understands that. The people who are accumulating gold understand that. We have outlived typically what world reserve currencies going all the way back to the 1400s have ever their lifespan. And we are already living on borrowed time. So I will tell you that, I don't think there's ever been one that lasted over 100 years. And now we're already well over that. If you go back to, even the existence of the Federal Reserve in 1913, we're past it. And if you realize most have a lifespan of 50 years or less, we went off the gold standard in 1971 or the gold backing. So we're living on borrowed time. There is a change that is coming. And I think people understand. The bigger question is, why would the BIS, which is the central bank, the most sophisticated bank in the world, reclassify gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset? That's a bigger question. And I think that underscores why the banks are buying it, because what it represents is 5,000 years worth of stability, 5,000 years worth of transparency, 5,000 years worth of being wealth in a period that has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic and everything the world's ever thrown at it. So the more things change in this world, and look, I'm 52 years old and I know this shit better than someone who's half my age, and the only way to learn it is to become wise with time. Someone who's older than me is more wise than me, and the point I'm getting at is that the more shit changes, the more it stays the same, and people realize that. And politicians are the same. We will choose inflation over austerity. The dollar is in trouble, and there's really no way out of nearly 200 trillion in debt. When you've offshored all your manufacturing, you can't produce your way out of it. You will inflate or default. And I think people realize that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And if they don't go back to some sort of a tether like gold, then it will be just another system. A CBDC that is not backed by something as another fiat currency. And if you want to make it work, you need to go back and have some sort of a tether to a system that puts restraint on politicians' ability to print endlessly. And I think the way they'll do that, they'll use blockchain to show the immutability of what's pegged to it and the veracity of it. But I don't think they'll make it redeemable the way President Roosevelt did, or the way it was before President Roosevelt confiscated gold, where you could go into a bank and exchange a paper dollar for a gold dollar. Well, I think instead what they'll do is they will back it using distributed ledger technology to show that, and they'll probably only have a very small fractionally backed currency, maybe even 10, 15, 20%. If you have 15% of every new unit in circulation that is pegged to gold, well, that still gives you latitude to enact monetary policy, but it does not give you the ability to do what the United States did in the last 4 years, and that is print more money in the history or the last 4 years than in the history of the country preceding it, which has just destabilized and completely debased the value of money through printing. And that's what politicians have done, going all the way back to Roman times, when the coins, they would pay their warriors to fight their wars all around the world as they were expanding their Roman Empire. Well, they started, just like the US, expanding all around the world. It cost too much money, you're going broke. So what did they do? They started to cut the rims of the coins around the edges and little bit off. And look, that's why you have ridges on coins now. So you can't do that. That goes all the way back to Roman times. So point I'm getting at is why? Because we're coming to the end of the Keynesian-based, Western debt-based experiment. And I think we are transitioning, as Zoltan Pozsar, who used to be the head of the New York Fed, who now works at UBS and understands the plumbing of the system better than anyone, we are entering a period of time, as he calls Bretton Woods 3. Bretton Woods 1 at the end of World War II, when the dollar was backed by gold. Bretton Woods 2 informally, when we left the standard in 1971 and the dollar became the petrodollar shortly after that. That's Bretton Woods 2. And he calls Bretton Woods 3 a system backed by transparency in commodities. And that's what this will be, a system backed by commodities. Transparency, there's your blockchain. And this gives the new system immediate credibility in a world where trust is completely lacking. And you look at what's happening in the United States, we have lost a lot of trust around the world. And now it extends into the rule of law, where people are questioning that the rule of law is applied equally across the whole gambit of people in the country. And you could argue it's not. And so we are entering a period of time where I think there's going to be a new system. And in order to make that system work, you need to give transparency and immutability and veracity. And that's what gold and the blockchain together, I believe, the only other tier 1 asset in the world, according to the most influential bank in the world, the BIS. Yeah, I think that's why they're doing it. And it starts from the people closest to the information and eventually will trickle all the way down. But yeah, I think this is exactly why they're doing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think. But then I guess how does that transition work? It sounds like if you transition from the current currency to a backed currency, there's going to be a lot of people who feel a lot of pain, especially I guess the average person. Is that what you're assuming, or you're not too sure how that's going to work?
I think there's going to be some sort of an event or a reset to precipitate that. We're almost 200 trillion in debt. How do you pay it off? You don't. As interest rates rise, it gets worse. So either you inflate or you default. Well, the third option is find a villain to blow everything up by weaponizing the dollar, creating instability in the country. And you see that instability in the United States, and then you weaponize the dollar outside the United States. You antagonize Saudi Arabia, which is the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. And Saudi Arabia has joined BRICS, the Belt Road Initiative, along with all of the OPEC countries, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the new BRICS Development Bank. You put all these entities together, it's 85 to 90% of human population, and they're not going green. We are. We antagonize them, tell them we don't need fossil fuels anymore, tell them we're going green, weaponize the dollar. Do you know who the 3 biggest importers of gold were last month? China, India, Saudi Arabia. You think there's any coincidence in this? It's the folks that are moving towards the BRICS and all of the countries that are on the Belt Road. The Belt Road alone is 75% of human population, 150 plus countries, every OPEC country on it. So yeah, I just think that there will be an event, and that event will probably be Jim Rickards saying August 22nd, they're going to announce their new commodity-backed currency. Well, how long would it take for Saudi Arabia to say, thanks for the memories, we're no longer taking oil payments just in dollars. In fact, our preferred method would be the new BRICS gold-backed currency. Bang, like that. It's over. As the world dumps dollars that they've been mandated to hold for 50 years since 1974 in order to buy oil from OPEC. 90+% of all oil sales in that time have been in dollars because of OPEC's promise to only value oil in dollars for the protection of the Saudi kingdom. But who is Saudi being protected by now? Russia. They signed an agreement with them in 2021. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the largest regional military financial organization in the world. It's the Chinese and the African Army and the BRICS. So you're now being protected by 2 of the 3 largest nuclear stockpiles in the world and the BRICS countries versus the West. And that's a formidable foe. How hard would it be for them to say, hey, we're going a different way, but thanks? Because you guys don't, it doesn't matter to you guys anyway, right? You're going green. So we're going to take oil sales in a different direction. And when that happens, every country on the planet that's had to own them will dump dollars because they don't need it to buy oil anymore. They'll buy a local regional currency or convert to the new BRICS currency, whatever it is. They will find great incentive to dump dollars. And that's when you see your Klaus Schwab moment, because hyperinflation ensues as a tsunami of dollars reach the shores of the United States. The byproduct of that is the market demanding higher interest rates. If you have 20% inflation, you can't have 5% interest rates. Your currency dies immediately. So the interest rates spike, not at the hands of the Fed, but at the hands of the market. And now you have a villain to point to for the destruction of the American system. It's those sons of bitches, Xi Jinping, Putin, OPEC. They did it to us. It's not the fact that we created more money in the last 4 years than in the history of the country and kept interest rates at zero for 15 years, creating massive distortions and imbalances. It's not the fact that people around the world question the authenticity of our elections and of our legal system. It's not the fact that we've squandered this opportunity. It's them. They did it to us. And the whole thing blows up because the byproduct of spiked interest rates is the inverse correlation between stocks, bonds, and real estate to that event. Everything blows up. It's the Great Reset, but instead of falling on the sword for the mismanagement of the world reserve currency, you point to the big bad villain that did this to us. And how else do you pay off all of this debt? A trillion seconds ago being 31,866 years ago, something like that. How do you pay it off? 31,688 years ago. That's a trillion seconds. How the hell do you pay it off if you have almost 200 trillion? 77 trillion alone in Social Security filled with IOUs that's paid to the American public on top of government military pensions and Medicare and Medicaid, let alone the 32 trillion that we owe the world. So we're so far down the rabbit hole that I think this was done specifically to find a villain and to enact a moment that allows them to roll out their new CBDC, and it'll be pegged to commodities, just like the head of the IMF said it must be in order to be authentic. So yeah, I think there's a plan for all of this, step by step by step. They are going to get to a point whereby in 2025, the BIS said every country needs to have an operational CBDC. I think we'll be there long before that. I just hope to God that we don't see the Great Reset leading up to the rollout of a new system that everyone begs for because they've just lost everything. But have no fear. Sign on the dotted line will make you whole. Just take our new CBDC. And these are the kinds of things that keep me up at night, and I think is the reason behind much of the lunacy that we see happening in monetary circles.
Yeah, I completely agree with a lot of the things you're saying. I guess my concern would be, why would anyone trust a gold-backed currency if they have very low trust? Because I guess, you mentioned blockchain, but we know there's sort of ways around, there's sort of backdoors, there's ways that they can prevent it. And, that's the same for the US, that's the same for BRICS.
You must have it audited. You must have transparency. And if they're going to do it and use this as their one shot at breaking free from the West, you have it audited independently, you have it verified, you have the blockchain show the veracity, you leave it open so people can see it, and you have it audited by independent auditors. Just like when they were going into the Iranian nuclear facilities, you have independent auditors come in and inspect it and say, yeah, it's okay. That's the only way it works. And I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I'll tell you this, people will trust blockchain and gold a lot more than they will politicians. At least it's a starting point. You want to make it work? Have it audited by an international committee of conglomerate of auditors that represent independent states or countries or however you want to do it, and have them come in and audit it. And yep, there it is for everyone to see. Bang, done. And now you have legitimacy. And you want to take it a step further. You want to really create a problem for the dollar, create a bond market, the way that the United States did in World War II with the bond market, and incentivized through patriotism, buy war bonds, support the troops. Well, you want this to work? Jim Rickards talks about this too. Issue a bond market denominated in the gold-backed new currency, and all of these countries that are signing up to it, over 35, you now issue those bonds backed by a gold-backed currency as a rallying cry to give yourself a substantial platform in the international community as a real world reserve. You are a world currency, and you want to be, as a settlement currency, you want to be world reserve, have a robust bond market. And their population is roughly 90% of the human population. You put all these groups together, they could really quick make a very substantial bond market. And all of a sudden, the dollar's toast. And so, yeah, these things, a lot of it, you have to kind of take you see everything that's happened now. You see what they were talking about. You got to take that third step and say, well, this looks like where it's going. That's Occam's razor. I don't know how it all plays out, but it just certainly seems to me this is where we're heading. And I've been saying this for 3 years. And what really frightens me is that for the 30 years prior, I would talk about things, and they happened very often because I talked about them in association with mathematics and economics, but they happened 15 years later, never when I thought it would, because the big money has a way of pushing things, kicking cans down the road, adding variables, manipulating markets, yada, yada, yada. But this has happened faster than I thought it would. And I was the only one talking about it 3 years ago. Now everyone is, and it's spinning and faster and faster and faster. And the fact that Jim Rickards says August 22nd, we see this new gold-backed currency is very frightening. If it happens to what he's saying at the new meeting for the BRICS in Johannesburg, then it's the beginning of a whole new system globally of what the dollar and the Western currencies, including the pound, including the euro, what they are and what they represent globally. So yeah, I think this is much bigger than buying gold and silver. Gold and silver to me have never been anything more than wealth. I never sold them as a hedge against catastrophe or against a massive change like which is afoot. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that that's not the case anymore. I'm concerned, really concerned for the ultimate value of the dollar and the entire system. And if you look at a man named Jared Bernstein, who is the head economic advisor to the current administration, he is has a degree in music theory and philosophy. He's a pseudo economist who in 2014 wrote a report that was picked up by the New York Times, in which it's called King Dollar No More, for which he advocates the US dollar immediately losing its world reserve status. So your head economic advisor, the current administration, is advocating losing the world reserve status for the imbalances and distortions it creates here in the United States. And the number 2 economic advisor is Lael Brainerd, who was just number 2 at the Fed, and prior to that was at the Treasury. And her whole platform is modern monetary theorists get rid of all the banks and go directly to the central bank. And look what's happening to our banks. And Janet Yellen said there'll be more consolidations. I believe there will be a flat out banking crisis in the 3rd and 4th quarter as more and more of these banks face more and more stress with rising rates, a slowing economy. And the regional banks in the United States hold 70% of the commercial real estate and 70% of small business loans. And those are the 2 areas that are being hit the hardest. And when these loans reset, and a lot of them are coming due here very soon, these ARMs or these leases that have to be reset, you're going to see companies and banks just go flat out of business, just like we saw in San Francisco, where the biggest mall in San Francisco and the biggest hotel in downtown San Francisco were just walked away from because they know it's a loser and they're not putting any more money in it, and goodbye bankruptcy, we're done. Well, how many banks can handle that are already on thin ice? Not many. And I think this problem is long from over. I think this is the eye of the hurricane. We got hammered in the front, and now the sun is out. Let's go for a walk. Well, you better not walk too far, because the trailing edge of the storm is going to catch you before you make it back home safely. That's how I really feel. I've never felt this way before, Anthony, never, but I do now.
Do you see it as the end of the US empire?
I see it as a changing of the U.S. empire. I see it as the end of the U.S. being the sole world reserve currency. You could argue our empire has been frail and cracking for several years now, but there's never been anyone strong enough to compete with the U.S. And when you see a lot of our allies who are realizing that, like Macron, who just did a 51-point trade agreement with China ranging from 5G to military engagement, bought a massive amount of liquid natural gas, paying in in yuan and had requested formal application and admittance to the meeting in Johannesburg for the BRICS. I think he was turned down, but he wants in. Mexico formally applied to BRICS, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, all of these countries that were our allies are choosing sides. Is it the end? I don't know that it's the end when you have the largest or second largest nuclear weapon stockpile in the world, and markets that are as advanced as ours. Forget about how fair they are or how legit or transparent they are. We have the best bond market in the world for now. So I don't know that it's the complete end of it, but what I do believe is that the standard of living in this country is going to decrease and there will be a lot of pain. And maybe it is the beginning of the end of the empire. Maybe they become one of a few empires or one of a few very influential countries in the world. And maybe it takes a reset to do that. I don't know. But what I do think is that the good times that made America what America was are going to be called into question. And maybe we won't see those for a very long time, maybe a generation. I don't know. I hate being the buzzkill at the party, the purveyor of doom and gloom, but I don't see any way around it. And we have antagonized and pissed off so much of the world and mismanaged the currency and created such divisiveness inside the US between black and white and red and blue and vaccine and no vaccine and all of these things where you're now defined by the person you voted for in the last election, and you can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner and talk about any of these things without having a fist fight. That's not the country I grew up in. That's not what America stood for. And I will say it still is the best place in the world, but the people running our country have really done us a disservice. And I hope somehow that we're able to right the ship. But even if we find better political leaders, even if all of this changes, we still have 200 trillion in debt nearly, most of which accumulated amongst the lowest interest rates in human history. We have a day of reckoning coming some way, somehow, just like the Romans did, just like every empire did before, whether you're talking France or the United Kingdom or the Dutch or whichever countries ruled the world for a period of time. They all had their ups and then their ultimate fall. And, speaking from a standpoint of historical context, yeah, you could argue we are on the way out, and that supremacy is moving eastward. In fact, the G7 will tell you that it is predicted by either this year or next year that the BRICS nations cumulatively will contribute a greater amount of global GDP by a little bit than the G7 nations will. Well, that's just beginning. And as more and more countries join on, and these are the countries that are the big producers of the world's commodities, right? The RICS and BRICS, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, they produce more of the world's gold and platinum and oil, and throw Saudi Arabia in there now, and fossil fuels and fertilizer. And I mean, rare earth metals needed to make batteries. And we haven't thought that out too well in terms of going green and using batteries. The guy's name is like Nadudu. I think he's the president of what is it? The president of I can't think of it at the moment. It is one of the OPEC countries, and I can't think of it at the moment. I'm sorry. I wasn't planning on going down this road, but he's one of I think it's Nadudu, and Indonesia, I believe it is. And he is calling for an OPEC-style cartel for rare earth minerals and metals as well. And most of them are found in Indonesia, in the Eurasian continent, China predominantly. And yet we want to go green. So it's out of the frying pan into the fire. So yeah, these are all big problems that are coming together at the same time that spell real big trouble for the US. And look, I wouldn't count the US out. We typically do well when our backs are against the wall, but I'll tell you, this may be the biggest challenge that we face, at least in my lifetime, in a generation. And yeah, I think there's a possibility that is the ultimate outcome. I hope not, but it is possible.
Yeah, it definitely seems more likely than 20 years ago. I guess if we look at the assets that they're going to perform, I'm sure you're thinking that, I guess this is a real performance compared to current fiat currencies that we have. I'm guessing that you're assuming that gold, silver, and probably other real assets are going to perform quite well, whereas the assets that have been reliant on this debt and that sort of increased liquidity, so you could say equities, bond markets, all those other things are probably going to perform not as well. Is that sort of your hypothesis?
That's exactly, absolutely, 100%. And So yeah, I do. I think, and one of the biggest reasons I say that is look at the fact that central banks are buying more than at any time in history over the last 18 months. And why did the BIS reclassify gold? And why are the central banks repatriating it? So yeah, the biggest money in the world is showing you where this all goes. The price is misdirecting everybody. And the price is misdirecting with great leverage. And it throws everyone off the scent. Well, if price was determinant of value, then who the hell's buying it all? And why is it all leaving the exchanges? Where is it going? Why are the central banks buying as much as they are? Aren't they the most well-funded and well-informed traders on the planet? You bet your ass they are well-informed. They're the ones who are writing the script. So if your intention is to accumulate what is in essence a very minute, finite supply of commodities in order to build your war chest, you can tell everyone you're doing that, or you're going to suppress the price of those assets and throw out bad rhetoric about it. And then you have your way to scoop it up. They suppress the paper price, drive down the price, they push it below moving averages, get all the funds to sell, come in and buy up all the physical pennies on the dollar when no one's looking at it. And then they paper over their short positions with more paper. So it's giving these central banks and the commercial banks the ability to pillage the shelf when no one is looking at subsidized prices paid back with inflated dollars. And when it's all said and done, they will have built their war chest at subsidized prices without any competition. And by the time everyone realizes, oh shit, I need to get some gold and silver, that's going to be a problem. And it's the same way people looked at Bitcoin when it was at 65,000. And maybe they'll look at it again if they think now that BlackRock just applied for an ETF and Fidelity, it'll go to 1 million. Maybe it does. And when it does, everyone who didn't buy it will say, shit, I should have bought it. I knew it. Now it's 1 million. It's too late. Well, that's what will happen with gold too. And they're using the environment of price and rhetoric. I mean, every one of the media outlets in the United States, from radio, TV, magazine, newspaper, they're owned by 4 companies. The narrative is the same. They're telling us what they want us to hear, and you have to go to alternative media to find truth. But it's that lack of coverage or the wrong coverage, along with price suppression, that is allowing this de-dollarization. And I think when it's all said and done and the switch is flipped, people will wake up and say, my God, where do I go now? And that's, yeah, I think these are real probabilities in a world of no guarantees that we end up in a place where gold and silver are identified by the inability to source it and prices being too high. Why do I say that? Not because I own one of the biggest metals companies in America. I say that because the people way above my level, the highest, most well-funded and influential traders on the globe, are telling you that gold and silver means something now, mean more than they have in a long time, enough to whereby they're buying more than at any time in history. That should mean something to you all out there.
Andy, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. My last question is what is one message you'd like people to take away from our conversation?
Trust your gut. Trust your gut. That's the only thing I can say. And pay yourself first. If you don't pay yourself first, you never get off the wheel. You never get out of the rat race. And trust your gut, because your eyes are going to lie to you. Your gut won't. And that's by design. Misdirection is a very, very prevalent topic. The book, The Art of War, is taught in every major law school on formulating arguments in the United States, on every major business school, on corporate hierarchy. It's the most influential or the most successful NFL football coach in history reads it before every game, Bill Belichick, on game theory. The whole idea of misdirection is beating your opponent without throwing a punch. The fight, the battle is won before it even starts if you use misdirection. In every game you've ever played, from chess to soccer to baseball to football, you use misdirection in the way that you employ your offense or defense to throw off the opponent. Well, the same thing is true in finance. And it's mandatory reading at the CIA. It's mandatory reading at West Point. Most Japanese business executives read it. The world knows of misdirection. So what you see with your eyes is misdirecting your wallet. And that's why you need to trust your gut and realize that the biggest money in the world is using this opportunity to de-dollarize. They don't need me and you crowding them out of their trade. So trust your gut and pay yourself first. Every paycheck you get, find a way to save some money. And if you're able to save it in gold and silver, even better. but pay yourself first. Even if it's $10, put it in a jar, whatever it is, find a way to treat yourself first to protect your savings than anything else. And even if it means paying $10 less on one of your bills, you'll catch up the next month. The fact that you're trying to pay it off at the same time, paying yourself first, is the best you can do. That's the best you can ask for. And that's where I would start.
It's a great message. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So if
Anthony,
anyone wanted
good to see you, brother. It's my pleasure. Let's do it again. And I appreciate your patience. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, but I'll leave you with one other word of wisdom. Drink lots of water and don't ever get a kidney stone. It was the most miserable, horrific experience of my life. And I appreciate your patience. I know we've been trying to do this for a few weeks, but I'll tell you what, I'll look forward to doing it again with you and picking up where we left off, hopefully somewhere not too far down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And yeah, I know is the best place people can find your work, Miles Franklin. Is it the best place?
MilesFranklin.com. That's correct. And any questions directed to me, info@milesfranklin.com. Address it to me or one of my brokers, and we can help any way that any questions or prices or whatever it is, we're happy to help. So info@milesfranklin.com with questions or to see a price list for larger orders, or milesfranklin.com to find out who we are and what we're all about.
Perfect. I'll put that in the description below. So thanks again for your time.
Stay well. Have a good weekend, Anthony. Look forward to seeing you again soon, brother.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified when new podcasts are released. I hope you're leaving with some great value about investing, trading, and finance. See you on the next show.